Hello and welcome to the ID Talk podcast. I'm Alex Perala. I'm here with my friend and colleague, Tony Bitsionis. Hello, Tony. How are you?
I'm good, Alex. How you doing?
I'm doing well. I am excited about our guest for this week, Danielle VanZandt, friend of the pod, returning to talk with us. She's with Frost Sullivan. She's the research manager for commercial and public security. And she always brings a lot of really interesting insights when she talks with us. I'm pretty excited to get to that, but I also just want to encourage people, listeners, if you haven't already checked out last week's episode with Andrew Shikiar, the head of the FIDO Alliance. He had a lot of really interesting things to say about FIDO's work. FIDO is obviously one of the most influential organizations in the identity industry. They're a major force behind passkeys, which are getting more and more support. So we really got into some interesting nuts and bolts discussion about how passkeys work and FIDO's approach to authentication. It's definitely important to understand what they're doing as we continue the discussion about how to use biometrics, how to authenticate people. So check it out if you haven't already. You can find all our podcasts on findbiometrics.com. We have a podcast section or wherever you get your podcasts. So before we get to Danielle, I believe we have a little follow-up news item, sort of, to last week's discussion about biometrics in policing. We had some really egregious misuse of biometrics in policing that we talked about last week. And this week, Tony, you have some news that is actually good from Scotland, right?
Yeah. So Scotland's police force, or Police Scotland as they're called, have actually started giving leaflets to people in custody, letting them know what type of biometric data was collected from them.
Mm.
And the leaflets also give them information on how to file complaints should they want to with Scotland's biometrics commissioner. So I feel like that's just a pretty wild contrast to the kind of stuff we talked about last week with misusing facial recognition software or just really poor police work leading to the arrest of an innocent man who was not even in the city at the time that
Yeah.
the crime was committed. And Scotland seems to be often in our news for positive reasons with regards to how progressive they are with biometrics and specifically biometrics in policing.
Mm. Yeah, one of the few countries with a actual like watchdog, official watchdog for specifically for policing and biometrics. And
Yeah,
they also had like a ethical conference or something recently as well, right?
yeah,
I
they had a what is it called? The Biometrics in Criminal Justice Conference this week, or this
right.
past week in Edinburgh. And yeah, it's just what it sounds like. It's a conference that it was their first inaugural one, and it's focusing on the use of biometric tech in policing, but framed through ethical and human rights considerations, or framed with ethical and human rights considerations. So it's just further kind of evidence showing that Scotland is very considerate with how it's approaching this new tech for police work.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because like even if they weren't being very ethical, they would still you would expect them to do this kind of thing. Just to at least make it look good. But it seems like they really are taking it seriously. Brian Plasto, the biometrics commissioner, he seems quite serious about making sure that there's a lot of transparency, and um, I appreciate it. I'm happy to see this
Yeah,
new.
absolutely.
And
Um,
I want to quickly, before we get to our talk with Danielle, I do want to talk about lasers.
oh,
Um,
good.
yeah,
It's
I'm
about time.
I'm gonna make myself sound like an idiot, but I just think this technology is really cool, and I want to make sure people caught it if there are any other pop science nerd types listening, we covered this news story about it was research from a group called Fleet. They're based in Australia. They're an interdisciplinary group of researchers, and they had a paper out about a new kind of laser technology called polariton lasers. Um, I guess what I should say off the top is they're comparing it to VCSEL lasers. Oh man, I don't remember what that stands for. Vertical cavity surface emitting lasers. These are used
Obviously.
these are used in the iPhone's facial recognition system. And as I
Okay.
understand, it's basically technology that is used to project a laser grid onto the user's face to map it in 3 dimensions. And these researchers with their kind of alternative laser tech, the polariton lasers, basically it's lower power. So they say the lasers are like pretty much as accurate as the VC cell lasers, but they use even less power. So it's an interesting new technology for um, anyone involved in like the actual engineering of these AI systems. And like the tech itself is just kind of um, like wild when you, at
Mhm.
least to me, as someone who doesn't have a hard science background. Um, I was talking about it with ChatGPT, trying to get some answers. And I learned that a polariton laser, um, what makes it unique is that it interacts with um, excitons. This is a kind of
Oh,
particle. Yeah, so there's I actually already knew this. There's the photons are light particles or waves or both, I think, from what I've come to understand about this about physics. But then there's something called excitons, which are a different kind of particle that arise when light hits a material surface. Certain surfaces have um, this quality where light hits them, and then certain electrons in the material will get excited. I'm using air quotes here. And then they'll like jump out of their like orbit around the atom. We're so many engineers listening are gonna write to me after this.
we're not
So
listening anymore.
Um, and then these excitons are created because the electron leaves this like space, and then there's like an attraction between the space and the electron, and that creates a new particle called the exciton. And then these new kinds of lasers somehow use excitons and photons to have this very precise like what's the word? Um
Laser?
Spectral purity was the
That's it.
technical term. It's like the very minimal wavelength, I think, for the laser, which allows it to be more precise. So, listeners, if you're confused by what I just said, so am I, and I'm really
Yeah.
sorry, but I think this
I
stuff is cool.
I understood none of that, but it was really uh, a wholesome experience watching you learn physics over the last 5 minutes and explain it to me. I thought that was well worth it.
Thank you, Tony. Let's talk to Danielle.
Yeah, let's talk to Danielle.
Okay, we are now very happy to be joined by Frost and Sullivan research manager Danielle VanZandt. Danielle, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be
Hey,
back.
Danielle.
Yeah, it's been a while. We're really happy to talk, always happy to talk with you. And especially right now, we'll be very interested to get your insights. I understand you just got back from Identiverse recently, and we're talking to a lot of folks there. But before we get to that, maybe we could just ask you to update our listeners who might not be familiar. Just let us know who you are, what you do for Frost and Sullivan, and maybe like how it involves biometrics and identity tech and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So to everyone out there, hello. My name is Danielle VanZandt. I'm the research manager for Frost Sullivan's security research practice. So I head up all research for security technology in the physical, logical, cyber, and identity security spaces, and all the ways that those different security technologies are starting to combine and converge together. That's our sweet spot of our market research and analysis. So I've been in this role about 8.5 years now, but we're a global team. We look at all these different technology domains and look at the buying patterns across both customer groups, but also how these systems are changing and innovating and becoming more and more relevant in all of our daily lives. And so because of identity security kind of being one of our big sweet spot areas, that's where my kind of niche and interest in the biometrics and digital identity space really started. And it's been one of my core areas throughout my time here.
All right. And I wanted to ask as well, like, just out of curiosity, what does your research process look like? Because for us, like, we're not researchers, but we're basically reading the news across the industry every day, and just kind of taking it in like a fire hose. It's extremely disorganized. But you know, we don't have to write research reports often, although sometimes we do. So, but what does it look like for someone at Frost and Sullivan? Like, how do you go about gathering the information you need on like a top level, I guess?
So kind of distilled in the easiest way possible. We are both drinking from the fire hose that you guys are about the media information and the news information from different companies. But that's just kind of one avenue to help us figure out what we're going to write about in our research. Usually we'll start with like a broad topic area. So in this case, the biometric space, what's going on. And we'll not only look at news, but we'll try to figure out, well, who are the main players? Who are the companies I need to talk to? Who would have an opinion on this? And we try to include vendors. Since we are a global company, we try to include vendors from across the world. So we want to try to get companies who both work in and are headquartered across the world, because those different customers have such different needs. And if you only talk with like North America, you're not going to get the story that you would hear from like a company who works in developing nations or nations that aren't as digitally first as some of, you know, Western Europe and North America are. So we really try to identify what that broader landscape is and then basically talk to as many people as possible, whether that's talking to vendors on the phone. If we can talk to customers, we love that, because then you can get some kind of unvarnished feedback that hasn't necessarily gone through the marketing bubble. And then from there, it's really a lot of synthesis and seeing what the patterns are, what everybody is saying about, well, this is what I use it for, but I really wish it could do this. Or I've seen this work in the financial industry. Why isn't this catching on in, you know, the private enterprise space or the healthcare space? Or lately, the big question has been, you know, well, where the heck does AI fit in this equation? Because now everything has AI. So, but we get a lot of those questions either from somebody we've talked to, whether it's a company who sells the product, whether it's a customer who uses it, or whether it's news. And so that really helps us to get organized around the trends and what is driving the market, what's holding it back. And then economic forecasting is a whole other animal that I'm not going to bore the listeners with, but it's a lot of math. I'll put it that way, and a lot of Excel.
Tony, I don't know about you, but I'm very grateful that math is not like a big part of our job.
I don't think we would have jobs if we needed to know math.
Trust me, some days I wish it wasn't mine.
So I wanted to ask you before you like before we get to AI and also Identiverse, you mentioned something that I had wanted to kind of touch on, which is you said like you talk to clients when you can of
Mhm.
vendors. Is it often the case? Like, how often is there sort of some kind of mismatch between what they say and what the vendor says? Or I guess even like more broadly, when you talk to like a whole bunch of clients in a certain sector and a whole bunch of vendors, are each side telling you different things at times, or like misunderstanding different, like they each have different views of the security situation that might not line up? Does that ever happen?
It definitely happens sometimes. I would say the biggest mismatches can sometimes occur when it's talking about more futuristic things. So, obviously, companies and vendors who sell technology, they want to show that they're innovative and that they're ready for kind of the next thing that's coming. Whereas a lot of customers are like, well, this is my problem today, and this is what I really need you to solve at the moment. And most do that well, but sometimes the customer's like, I'm not even thinking about this trend. I don't know why they're talking about it.
Yeah.
Um, I've had a couple of those before, but usually most of them are pretty aligned on like, well, here's what I'm facing, whether it's a customer, whether it's the industry overall. Here's the threats I'm facing. And here's how I need to prove myself in order to get approval to buy some new security technology.
Mm.
Um, there's as long as those are aligned, and more than likely they are, because the customer is still using it. We don't have too many mismatches there. But that's actually a project that in some kind of customized capacity, Frost Sullivan can do it. It's not my main domain, but um, that's actually another bit of analysis work that Frost and Sullivan and a lot of other business consultancies can help with.
Yeah, that's interesting. That makes me think of like more and more I'm coming across these ideas about being quantum safe. And
Oh
this
man.
is not something I know much about. And so I feel like I'm in the position that a lot of companies, I guess customers of biometrics vendors are often in, where they're like, I understand what you're saying is important. I don't know what it means.
Yeah, and I felt the same way, honestly, with a lot of the AI discussions coming
Mm,
into security, because we have had AI capability for a while across the security landscape, but with generative AI and all these other ones that are now being discussed, that's the part where I'm kind of in that same position as you, Alex, where I'm just like, I get where you're coming from, but I don't think this is relevant, guys. And even me from the research space feeling like that, I can only imagine what a customer feels like because, we're a little bit more entrenched than a typical user would be.
yeah. So then, like on that topic, I mean, and I guess pivoting a bit to what you were seeing and hearing at Identiverse, how did AI factor into the conversations there? I'm guessing it was a huge topic.
Shockingly, not as much as you would think.
No.
And yeah, which was pretty interesting to me. It was a topic of the talk that I actually, the panel discussion, I should say, that I was a part of. But when it came to like walking the vendors and talking to people on the expo floor, it really wasn't as vital as some of the other themes I was seeing, which were talking about, easy integration, ease of use, accessibility. Um, I've said before in some of my other talks that these are like kind of the squishier parts of security, but just making these things easy enough to use for both the users and the people implementing them. I would say that was probably one of the bigger themes from the show than, how do we put AI into everything?
Yeah.
Because, like I said before, it's already been there before. We've already had some of these capabilities.
So, I guess this is related, but I mean, we find ourselves writing a ton about deepfakes, the deepfake threat, and everybody seems to be talking about that. What, like, was that a major topic, or was that sort of well, yeah, how prominent was that when in your discussions?
Yeah, that was actually a key theme of my panel, was how to combat these AI enabled or AI based threats, risks, attacks that occur, which probably is the newest threat vector to the entire landscape.
Mhm.
And a lot of that would come down to, well, biometric solutions are pretty uniquely placed to be the biggest help in combating these threats, and here's how. And
Mm.
so that was a big focus of my discussions, because that's actually a bit of research we're going to do later this year.
So, speaking of deepfake threats, I mean, it's something that we've already touched on is so prevalent now. Everybody's talking about it, but I feel like whenever I speak to a family member, or today, for example, I was on the phone with a customer service rep, and it came up, people don't really seem to understand what they're afraid of. And speaking to some vendors over the last few weeks, everybody is in agreement that it's such a huge threat. But do you think there's a kind of I don't know, a niche to be filled in educating customers, like the general public, on what the
Yeah.
actual threat of deepfakes is, as opposed to just specifically how it can be addressed by biometrics?
Yeah, there probably would be a good space to talk about what exactly a deepfake attack would look like. Because right now, the main way, people outside the industry really think about it is those fake videos that pop up on social media.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So that's what they think of as a deepfake. And then to say that it's also a threat to, your ability to use your banking app, your ability as a consumer to log into any of your digital apps, it doesn't translate to
Yeah.
a person in their real life.
Mhm.
So there's a space to talk to the end users, but I think there's also a space that we need to talk about it within the industry of what precisely these threats are to the business. Because I found in my initial discussions that the most immediate example of, deep fake threats or, presentation biometric attacks were things like everybody immediately goes to financial services and customer contact centers to prove your identity there. And then it's like, okay, well, what else is there? Where
Mm.
Yeah.
else could these attacks occur? Because honestly, the attackers have already figured it out. Now we need to know where exactly we need to defend.
Yeah, I have a little story related to this, similar to Tony talking. I think this was like 6 weeks ago. I was having dinner with a few friends who are not in the industry, but they're tech savvy people. One of them is in web development, and somehow deepfakes came up, and he was speculating, like, yeah, I guess they could, someone could impersonate somebody in a company and like commit fraud that way. And I was like, that actually already happened. Like that happened in January where this
Mhm.
guy got tricked by a deepfake CFO into doing like $25 million in wire transfers. And
Yep.
and my friend was like, oh, I thought we were at least months away from that. I guess it's already happening. And I was like,
Yeah.
Yeah, the person I was speaking to today, she was a lovely customer service agent at a bank, and she, I'm not exactly sure how it came up, but she said something like, "Oh, right, with all the AI, somebody can just steal my face." And I
Right.
wanted to say, well, but why would they do that? Like, they're not just going to steal your face. You're not like, a person of some sort of importance that they would need to steal your face. I said, your information is much more vulnerable than your face, or it's much more damaging to you personally, just for an everyday person. And she was like, oh, all right, yeah, okay, that's something else to be afraid of.
Yeah. It's more of these areas that, yeah, they need your face, but they literally just need it for that one moment of authentication. And then once they're
Right.
in, they don't care whose face they use to get in, as
Yeah,
long as they're
exactly.
in. One of the other kind of different examples that I heard about when I was talking with Encode actually at the show, and this gets away from those typical use cases that I had been hearing for these deepfake attacks, was about ensuring that on the healthcare insurance marketplaces, that the insurance plans that were being posted and offered in those insurance marketplaces were actually real and existed and could be actual services. And once we started having that conversation, my brain just kind of started going down the trail of, oh, I mean, like any e-commerce website, an Amazon, a Temu, that's how they could potentially root out, fraudulent products to make sure that people don't buy them and then never get a product.
Yeah.
Right. Oof.
So is that like a kind of phishing that you're describing, or you mean somebody is like using deepfake tech to set up an entire fake vendor profile?
That's exactly it.
Yeah. Okay.
The only time they actually need the deepfake tech is when it does whatever authentication.
Right.
So the authentication for the health insurance marketplaces, for example, whatever authentication proof needs to be given in order to have this fake insurance posted in the marketplace, that's where the deepfake occurs. In the e-commerce sites, wherever point that the retailer goes to try and prove that this is an actual business and that this product exists, that's where the deepfake is used. And then otherwise, they don't need it anymore.
Yeah, it's like once you're onboarded, you're all set. You're golden.
So it's like any product, service, application where you need to onboard and have any type of authentication, that's actually where a deepfake puts you at risk. And those are all the areas we need to protect. And then once you think about it that way, it's like, oh, dang, there's a lot of places that this could actually be successful.
So when you were talking to vendors at Identiverse, which I guess we should mention, I mean, listeners are going to know, but it's a major conference tackling like identity technology. When you were talking to vendors there, what were they saying is the solution? Like or how at least did they explain they're solving this problem?
So the cool thing that I kind of found is, even though this is more of a newer threat, we already have a lot of the tools at our disposal to combat some of it. So it's figuring out, if somebody's trying to do what's called a presentation attack. So that is one of the attacks where you like put on a mask or hold up the picture of a person. Those attacks can be thwarted with things like liveness detection and with like focus detection to watch where the eyes are going on a person. These are all things that are already being used. So from that sense, we already have the proper defenses, but it's just putting them in all the different places down this kind of chain that we've identified of vulnerabilities. Because if you protect it in one spot, that's the other thing I found, is that these attackers are persistent. They'll just keep going to try to find the next vulnerability point and keep checking.
Yeah, and I guess AI basically automates that work, or a lot of that work.
It's automated. And then the other thing that's kind of scary is that to do some of the more quote unquote advanced attacks, things like injection attacks, where these can both be automated, but they can also be programmed. And a lot of the tools needed to program these things are easily found in the app stores. Like, this isn't even hidden behind deep or dark web tech. It's just right there for us. And it's things that people who aren't necessarily tech savvy, but know a little bit about tech, like gamers, they'll know some of these things. Like you get a device emulator. I mean, I know of so many video game emulators. To know that that's now being used to fake an entire mobile device signature to pass
Yeah.
an authentication measure.
Wow. So you said a second ago that you think that the industry is equipped to handle these threats. But what would you say are some of the obstacles that are in the way or that would prevent, maybe not prevent, but that would maybe just stand in the way of being a step ahead of these attacks? Because
Yeah.
like you just said, they're persistent. They're not going to stop. Is it
Yeah.
always just going to be a case of playing catch up, or is
I
there
think,
anything that you think? Yeah.
well, unfortunately, when it comes to like the cyber domain, I think we've all found that, or the digital domain, I should say, um, we're never going to perfectly catch up to the bad guys. They're always going to be innovating
Hmm.
better than us. Um, but with this threat in particular, it feels like it's a little bit backwards where we have some of the best mitigation measures already. It's just figuring out where else they need to go. And so because of that, that's education. It's teaching customers and the vendors who are selling this tech of, oh, you want to combat a deepfake style threat. Yes, in your customer onboarding process, you've already put biometrics and liveness and good authentication things here, but what about in your contact center? What about in this spot in your business? What about during this kind of transaction in your organization? So it's teaching customers and like the businesses who are using these systems where else they need to implement these kind of controls and showing them where they could help fortify themselves a little bit better.
Kind of like a holistic look at security,
Yeah.
I guess, rather than just because there's no silver bullet, is what it
No.
seems.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, there never is.
Yeah.
But the nice thing is if it's a customer who's already, like I said, using a biometric solution in their customer onboarding process, if they've already had successes there, then it's a little bit easier for them to go and get support to expand it to other areas of the business. So that eliminates a lot of the typical challenges we get in security with funding about, oh, security is a sunken cost. Well, nope, we've already got results about how it's working here. Why not put it in other areas of the business?
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Well, we've talked a lot about deep fakes, but I am curious about kind of other things that are going on that you might have seen at Identiverse. So I don't know, you might not really have an answer to this, but I'm kind of curious what's up with fingerprints at this point, because I know obviously when the pandemic broke out, there were a lot of reports. I don't remember if Frost was among them, but a lot of market researchers saying this is basically the end of fingerprints. And it really
Yeah.
does seem like a lot of fingerprint vendors have kind of gone away or don't seem as prominent. So like what did you see at Identiverse or just in your research in general? Like where do you think that part of the industry is at this point?
Yeah. So actually, I did see a little bit of different modalities when I was there. Obviously, the pandemic really pushed face to the forefront. And I remember even like Find Biometrics' year in review during the pandemic years about, face becoming the top modality for a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think fingerprints are going to go away entirely. And in fact, they're still either they retook number one or they're still the number two modality. And it's pretty even between them and face. Um, I think there's been a little bit more where people are like, okay, I don't mind touching something again.
Yeah.
So that part has at least come back. I don't think it'll go away just because so much hardware infrastructure and investment has already been done for them, at least for the systems already in place.
Mhm.
Um, is there declines in newer ones? Potentially. Um, but a lot of that could also go down to the fact of, you can do a fingerprint biometric reading on a phone.
Right.
don't necessarily need all these readers anymore. And then with the phone, you immediately have the option of the face. So it's almost like those two are becoming pair, is something that I'm starting to notice. The other place I've seen fingerprint kind of transition over to is kind of a little rebirth in the hardware token space, where it's not about like a dongle anymore, but you know, the ID cards are no longer gone, they're just smarter. So, you have your chip card or whatever reader, but in order for it to be activated, you have to put your thumbprint over a certain area. And so because of that, the biometric part is protected. You get the MFA benefits, and a lot of the hardware token vendors or the card readers, they still remain active. Like it doesn't all have to go away. So, and I wouldn't have expected that at the start of the pandemic, but seeing it now, I'm like, okay, that's a way you can maintain relevancy. Because there's always going to be those verticals that don't necessarily want to get rid of the cards, that would prefer their employees to have some kind of physical token. But if you can better protect it to where if they lose it, the token is still kind of, the token isn't a security risk, this is kind of the way to go. Because the tokens, even if they're lost, if they also require some kind of biometric element to it, it's still worthless even if you lose it.
Yeah, it's like same with the security keys that you would just like plug into your laptop.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. And I know like with those, there's no, you're not, it's not a shared surface. So the
Right.
COVID era concern doesn't apply in the first place. But it's also kind of like just out of my own personal preferences, I just kind of like want people to be rational. So it's kind of, it's been interesting to me to watch, at a certain point during the pandemic, everyone kind of was like, oh yeah, it doesn't really spread by touching things, but they still didn't want to touch things. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I'm happy to hear that the fingerprint kind of sector is still alive and maybe coming back or has come back.
Yeah, I think they've just figured out other areas, other avenues to maintain their relevancy. Like they're not going to push a bunch of fingerprint readers to a new customer now. I think they're going to push for a lot more of that, like bring your own device strategy, because then the customer doesn't have to buy all this stinking hardware. They can just rely on the phones that we know as people, most people have in their pocket.
Well, Danielle, this has been an extremely interesting conversation, and I love just having a like expert, a market analyst and expert go to these shows and come and tell us what she heard. So maybe we can do this again sometime soon. It certainly makes our jobs easier to not have to go there ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. I'm happy to do it. Summer's kind of a chill time for shows. We don't typically have any. So probably the next one on the calendar I'm even thinking about is GSX in September.
Okay, cool. Well, maybe we'll talk to you shortly after that. But in any case, I hope you'll come back soon. And thanks again for joining us and sharing all these insights with us. It was really great.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me here.